Hello, my name is Arturo Hinojosa, and I'm a principal product manager at Amazon Web Services. Today, we're going to talk about making the career transition from pre-sales to product management. So a little bit about myself before we get started and why I'm sort of talking on this topic. So as I mentioned, I'm a PM at AWS and I work on the non-relational databases team. Today, I manage a team of product managers and outbound specialists working on our database services, helping them bring to the market, defining the roadmap, those sorts of things. I've been with AWS since about 2016, but not too long ago, before I was a PM at AWS, I actually started off my career as a solution architect and sales engineer. So I did straight out of college, helping customers evaluate, deploy, and integrate software, working on things such as billing systems and telecommunication software and financial services stuff, looking for money laundering and, all sorts of other financial no-nos. It was a lot of fun. And I worked as an SE and an SA for about 6 years, and I often get the question of saying, "Hey, Arturo, how did you sort of go from being an SA and an SC to the PM, right?" And that was what Product School invited me here to talk about today. So sort of what that career transition looked like. What was my journey? Why I believe and I know that technical SEs and SAs make really good product managers, as well as some of the lessons learned that I've picked up along the way and tips that you can use if you're also thinking about making that transition yourself. So hopefully you find today's presentation helpful. So my journey from SA, SC to PM was definitely not a straight line. There are lots of different things I've tried along the ways to sort of figure out what I like to do and I thought was interesting and where my skills are at. And in each one of those sort of stops, I learned something to help me sort of take the next step. So I'll kind of walk you through my journey to give you a sense of what sort of pushed me from along step to step, as well as sort of, what I sort of picked up and the skills I picked up along the way, helped me sort of ultimately get to where I am today, which is, like a PM manager at AWS. So as I mentioned earlier, I really started off my career out of college working as an SA. And I, initially was like a developer and I thought I was going to be like a coder, but then I realized, coding is cool. I like it. It's a lot of fun. But what I really like is I like working with customers. I sort of like being out in the field. I don't just want to be behind the desk. So I still like to solve technical problems. I like sort of putting things together, like love Legos as a child, right? I like the Legos of technology now as an adult. And that's sort of what led me to being an SA, right? So you get to really be hands-on with customers, listening to their problems, going very deep with them to help them solve, challenge things, help them grow their business. Over time, I also learned that I like the sales side. That's why I sort of went from an SA to an SC, because again, I really like sort of the high pressure situations of trying to win a deal. I really like sort of building something new for a customer, so help them understand the value, of what the companies I work for offered. And I did that for a while. And again, it was a lot of fun. But, sort of along the way, the better of an SC and an SA that I became, the more I did things like working on, like sales enablement to sort of help other SEs and SAs on my team whenever we launch new products. Or I found myself often bringing a lot of feedback back to our product teams and engineering teams of things that I was seeing as I work with customers. And I actually found that I really like doing that sort of stuff, right? Being, sort of on a little more of the strategy side, having more input on the product roadmap, I thought was pretty cool. And that sort of led me from being an SC to a role called technical product marketing. You don't have them in every company, but basically what tech marketing does is sort of, they're like the field side of product management and product marketing. It'll continue to sort of let me be hands-on with customer, because in tech marketing, I was able to do things like help customers with new product betas and, bringing feedback back to the engineers and then the product managers, as well as doing things like giving roadmap presentation for customers who kind of wanted to know what was coming down the pipe. And that was a lot of fun. Then, I started working on this one project and I got exposed to then product marketing and more traditional product marketing, which I really liked, right? Basically it was like selling, but a lot more strategic. You thought about things like pricing, which I never really thought about. You thought about messaging in a much deeper way. And, I got this opportunity when this project I was working on and the peer I was working with in product marketing decided to take a new role. I said, hey, I kind of raised my hand and said, you know what? I'd like to try that. So I kind of asked if I could, move from tech marketing to product marketing. And it was cool because it gave me a really cool opportunity to learn things I just had never thought about before. So being so technical, it gave me sort of my good sort of first introduction to just really the business world. And I liked it. Product marketing is really, really fun. I found that I actually really love doing things like developing messaging and positioning, understanding sort of where, what are the opportunities were for stuff. But it still was sort of like, I don't want to say it's a support role, but it still wasn't the ownership that I wanted. And that's really what pushed me eventually to just doing product matches. One, I wanted to build, I didn't want to just sort of have influence on what the roadmap looked like. I really wanted to help drive that. I wanted to say, hey, these are the things that customers really, really need. These are the big problems we should be solving. And I want to have sort of more input on how we do these things, right? And it really let me leverage sort of my diverse work experience, as going back from being an SA and an SE, even a developer and a technical marketing, I sort of was able to sort of bring all these different facets of my career together. Because as a product manager, you really do have sort of 360-degree responsibility for the success of your product. And you have to be, very cross-functional and work with all these different teams. So having that sort of perspective of what all these teams sort of did, it has made me a pretty successful PM because, again, I'm able to have empathy with not just my customers, but other stakeholders and other members of the team. And it's really not that unique of a journey. It's pretty common, I found, for a lot of my PMs and a lot of the great PMs that I work with to have sort of that technical SC, SA, engineering background, right? And again, it's probably one of some of the best PMs I know have that background, especially when you look at things like technology companies or data companies, analytics, as in there's such, or anything where you're selling to a developer, right? I mean, it requires a very deep understanding of your customer, of the technology, how all those things work. And, PMs that have that strong technical background really have an advantage here because you're able to can really empathize with your customer. And that's really what makes SEs and SAs great PMs, right? As a PM, you often find yourself working backwards from the customer. What does the customer need? What is their use case? As an SE and SA, because you spend so much time in the field, sleeves rolled up, arm in arm with the customer, working things out, trying to make things sort of work and trying to fill in gaps where there are maybe some shortcomings. You just have such deep customer empathy on the realities of how deploying big software products and cloud services work, right? And it's not just that it's deep, it's also very practical. I find sometimes with newer PMs, they have a challenge understanding hey, if I build it, they will come and the customers will love it and everything will just be amazing. It takes time for you as a PM to sort of build up the experience and know that, hey, you have to migrate something a lot of times to go what you're using today to go over here, or just understand the internal politics of an organization. The fact that, the IT guy probably doesn't run the whole company, he has to get buy-in from different stakeholders and, there's budgets and that sort of stuff. So that real world practical experience just helps you sort of really understand, if I build it, what other stuff do I need to support it? And that's a perspective that SAs and SEs bring to product management, which is really powerful and differentiated. The other thing that helps is, technical PMs are really able to earn trust with their engineers. As an engineer, the last thing you want is a PM that tells you to go, build this crazy thing which you don't understand, the requirements sort of what poor defined, what the use cases are not really clear. It causes a lot of ambiguity and a lot of churn for engineers, which is, the thing they hate the most, right? So if you can go in there and say, hey, I've got the technical credibility because I've actually deployed things like this before in my previous career. I understand how all these things work and the architectures of the customers and what other tools they're using and where these integration points are. That buys you a lot of credibility. And on top of that, you're able to provide a lot of context around use case, which engineers love. If you're able to kind of say, hey, these are the SLAs that customers typically want to meet, or these are the performance needs they have, or these are the other tools they use and how those tools interact with the stuff that you build. All that really rich context helps them build better products and help build better solutions, and you help build better products. So, those sort of two things, that ability to really empathy with the customer, work backwards from their world, and be able to earn, trust with their technical stakeholders, really is what gives the SEs and SAs a leg up when they sort of make that PM transition. But again, it's not all perfect. There are some things where you have to sort of grow as you sort of make the change, right? The first is learning to prioritize. As an SC, you are programmed to solve all the customers' problems because, again, you're trying to win the deal, you're trying to help them out. So you will look for all these solutions, and everything's very critical. But when you kind of get to the PM land, it's not that you don't know these things exist, but you have to learn to prioritize because again, there are 50, there are 500, there are a million things you could work on. So you have to be much more calculating in, what are the most important things I need to go work on? What are the things that have the biggest impact, both for my customers as well as for the business? And you also have to balance those with the cost of those things, right? Maybe you could go spend 6 years building something amazing, and you should do that. Don't get me wrong. But oftentimes, hey, if I spend 3 months doing something, maybe I could unblock a little bit of it, and that's where you get the whole MVP thing. So again, it's sort of in making those balancing decisions and sort of thinking about the business side of that sort of stuff it takes a while to learn because again, SAs are programmed to help. As a PM, you have to be sort of programmed to prioritize, understand why. The other big thing you have to sort of learn is learning to say no. And this is, again, really hard, right? Again, going back to SAs, and SAs just want to please the customer. But you also sometimes that SAs have to say no. But when you say no, it's almost like a no because of this other thing that's out of my control. Like, no, I can't help you do that because we don't have that feature. Or no, I can't help you do that because it's going to take too long and you have a tight deadline. Or all these, all very good reasons why you have to say no, but you help the customer with a workaround. When you say no as a product manager, it's a different no. It's a no or saying, hey, I understand what you're trying to say. Yep, it's totally valid. But for whatever very probably good reasons, I'm choosing not to prioritize it, or I'm choosing just not to do it, right? Maybe it's too nichey and, there's an easy workaround, or, this is probably not or this may not be the direction I want to grow the product, or I think strategic. And those sorts of no's sting customers a little bit more because it then feels like, you're not listening to them. So you have to be more tactful about saying that no. Oftentimes bringing in an essay to help them with a workaround, but it's kind of like, heavy is the head that wears the crown, as they say, right? Like the fact that you are sort of pushing back and challenging customers in a new way is something you just aren't programmed as an SE. And it takes a little while to sort of learn what is the right amount of backbone, how do you sort of negotiate those situations? And then also like, who can help? As an SA, like you often are sort of like, the last person on the line. It's up to you. You got to get it done to win the deal or get the deployment or meet the timelines. That's not true as a PM. Like there are other resources you have to learn to tap. You have to learn to delegate. You have to learn to leverage your stakeholders, like bringing in an SA or bringing in a pro-serve person or, providing a workaround or an alternative. So it's much more strategic. It's a little more tactful and it takes a while to sort of learn how to develop that muscle. So with that, let me talk about some of the lessons learned that I've sort of picked up along my journey here, and hopefully they'll help you, apply them to your own career. So, when you first want to start off, you have to learn how to ask a lot of why questions. And this is really the key thing that you have to sort of pick up as a PM is like, if we're going to do something as a company, why are we doing it? Why is it important? Why does the customer need this? Why is this a big opportunity? Because again, you could do 50 million things, but it's about prioritization. It's about understanding the context behind the things that you do. So you have to start thinking much bigger than you sort of did as an SA, because you have to go ask and influence an engineering team to go spend a lot of resources, right? A lot of cycles building something, or you have to go convince your leadership that, hey, I need engineering resources to build this thing because there's a big opportunity here. You have to articulate all of these things. And, these are sort of conversations you typically just don't have as an SE or an SA, because again, you're so focused on blocking something, you're often not thinking back about like, well, why am I unblocking it? Why is this the right thing to go unblock? What other things could I be unblocking instead or working on instead? So again, this is really where the developing that strategy muscle takes time. And the best way to do that is just practice and asking deep, probing questions that sort of, always challenge your assumptions, play your own devil's advocate. These are the things that really help you sort of become a much more athletic PM. It's also because at some point, you're also going to have to probably do things where you're leaving sort of your domain expertise. You have to just be like a good PM athlete and asking probing questions, no matter the field or discipline, no matter what the product you're working on, will just make you a better PM and a better part of the team, because you're able to sort of help the team make trade-offs and make really good decisions. The other thing you have to learn to be is relentlessly data driven, and this is something at AWS. We take like to the 1 millionth degree, right? But it's so true because it's so valuable. You have to listen to the data. You can't let things like a single customer experience completely influence your judgment, right? And I see this a lot with newer PMs, engineers that don't spend a lot of time in the field. To have one conversation with a customer, a couple conversations, they think they're soulmates. They think this is the true North Star of all their decision making, but it's just one or two conversations. You have to really develop a mechanism, help you get and analyze trends across lots of customers, right? Is that one conversation even the right customer, or are they just not in your target customer segment because you're trying to because you think the opportunity is over here? So you have to really understand, like, how am I going to talk to tens, dozens, hundreds of customers without actually talking to them? And whether that's leveraging your field teams, setting up feedback sessions, developing mechanisms for people to like record feature requests and the content on those feature requests. But you really want to be able to say, hey, it's not that I talked to one customer, two customers. I talked to a dozen, 2 dozen, 15, whatever makes sense given the problem I'm trying to solve. But I have a lot of data of diverse opinions that help me inform, right? And I can challenge my assumptions. I can challenge the decisions because I have data that proves to me and I can use to prove to others these are the right things to go do. So you really have to be relentlessly data driven. And you have to use that data even past the decision. You have to use that data to then also validate was that the right decision, because that can influence future decisions. So again, you have to really be used to learn to measure your performance using metrics. Like, are you measuring adoption? Are you measuring revenue? Are you measuring something like a customer satisfaction score? You want to start developing and use these North Star metrics to help you say, hey, like, we think that the right thing to do is this, and to validate that, we're going to measure this, and then we're going to track that measurement over time to see whether we're doing the right thing. And you also want to make sure you're grading that performance against your expectations. One of the biggest learning moments for me is, I was sitting in this presentation to our executives, and this other team was talking about this thing they just built and launched, and they were super excited about it, and you're rattling off all these stats. And at one point, one of the guys, I think it was one of the guys, was like, and we've got, like hundreds of big customers using this thing already. And the senior executive sort of looked at them with a kind of a quasi blank stare and said, well, the guy was expecting like this like clapping and cheering, but the executives kind of sat there, was like, I don't know what that means. Were you expecting tens of customers at this point, or thousands of big customers at this point? Because your answer is going to change how I feel about if you tell me you have hundreds of customers at this point, right? Either you're massively overperforming or you're underperforming. So being able to sort of develop these models and develop expectations, which then you can measure against your own metrics, is just that this is sort of what makes a fantastic PM that can really sort of then influence and share metrics up and sort of say, hey, this is how we're doing. Things are going well. I know they're going well. They're better than we expected. So we're on the right strategy. Or, hey, things aren't going as we're expected, and we have to pivot. We have to make a change. We have to reevaluate something. So, having those sort of data metrics is really important. And again, these are things that you never really had to do as an SA before. It's sort of like, win the deal. Yeah, awesome. High fives, right? But now you have to sort of say, like, did I win the right deal? Did I win the deal enough? It's a whole different mentality. It takes a little bit of a time to learn. And just learning how to measure stuff is one of the things that will help you quickly become a much better PM. So, what are some tips you can use to sort of pick up these skills? Well, one is you have to sort of really capitalize on the overlap between the SA and PM roles. And I sort of purposely peppered some of these examples earlier as I was going through my career story and sort of stuff. But again, there's lots of places where the PM job and the SA job intersect. And this is going to give you sort of a foot in the door if you are interested about making that change, to go, validate for yourself that, hey, this is the stuff I really want to go do. And it also is a good way to sort of network with the PM team if you do want to make the change, right? It's often how we source SEs into our PM team. So one, you want to set up and drive technical enablement. This is probably like the easiest thing you can do as an SA if you want to get more strategic, right? Because it gives you exposure to the strategy side. You're sitting with the PMs and the PMMs that are working on these decks with you and making sure that you have the right messaging and positioning, and there's the competitive analysis, all that stuff that goes into technical enablement. If you like doing that sort of stuff, that is a good sign you may be interested in product management long term, because this is probably the most PM-ish part of the SA role, right? The other thing you can do is do things like support new product launches. When I was in tech marketing, this is sort of really my first foray into the roadmap side of stuff. As you work on these beta programs, you work on previews, you're out there with the customers, you're capturing feedback, you're bringing that back to the product team, you're iterating, they ask more questions, you go back, and you start to sort of learn what are the right sort of discovery questions, not just for winning a deal, but for building a product, right? If I did this, what would you do? Or how would you like this to work? The different questions that you ask during a discovery where you're trying to qualify the customer. When you sort of start asking these beta preview questions, you're really building a rapport with the customer to understand how the product should work and what are the trade-offs the customer is willing to make. These are the whole different new set of questions. And it also exposes you to working on a cross-functional team, and seeing how a roadmap is developed. It was really cool when I was working on beta programs, you sort of work with the PMMs to build the deck for that, just to educate a customer on what the beta does and why they should try it. You work with the PM on sort of stuff. You might work with marketing to set up like the email mechanism to sort of capture feedback surveys, that sort of thing. So it really gives you an opportunity to work with those teams that work on the product and strategy side and go to market side a lot more than you would have as an SA. And then finally, you want to get yourself involved and interject into the roadmap planning process. And every company has its own sort of way that it does this. But essentially, every PM wants input on what they should be building next. What are the challenges customers have with the product today? So if you can provide that input, with one-on-one meetings with your PM or joining the PM meetings, or even better yet, aggregating feedback from across the field teams to share with the PMs, that's a great way to sort of get yourself interjected into the roadmap planning process. Really start getting a lot more strategic. The second tip I'll offer is you want to leverage your network. And, by leveraging your network, that sort of means like looking for internal openings on familiar product teams, right? Like today, if you work on some product or service and the PM team is deciding to grow and they're looking for a new PM, that'll be your best first PM job, because you're able to leverage your technical expertise about the product to sort of, help you sort of fill the gap on stuff you can work on as you ramp up on the other core PM skills. That way you're not sort of walking in like, totally like, what do I do? But at least, hey, I can contribute by, doing some field work or working on a new feature and this capturing feedback. Like this just gives you something where you can sort of feel like you're adding value until you learn how to do things like pricing, which is like totally left field, right? Or something that might be new to you. You also want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success by looking for teams with PM leaders that either have a similar background or they have a successful track record of training SEs and SAs, right? Because again, it's one of those things where you're going to need a little bit of mentorship to make the change. Like anything, practice makes perfect, something you've never done before. So you want to make sure you're working with a manager and with a team that is sort of on board with helping you make the transition and make the change. I find some folks on the PM side, especially if they come more with the traditional PM background, like the MBA from the fancy school, they want to build a lot of frameworks. Those often might not be the best first-time PM managers unless they're really, really innovative, developing technical talent, right? It's just something where you want to make sure that there's someone that's going to help you out and have your back as you're making the change. And the other thing to think about is you want to look for your network connections and for opportunities working on really highly technical products. This is the best place to sort of get started, because if you're working on product and data analytics or something that's working for developers, those companies want really technical PMs. They want folks that can, talk with engineers, because those are and developers who are your customers, data scientists, and really roll up their sleeves and get deep with them. So if you can sort of bring that technical background, it's a leg up, right? And oftentimes, and I know when we have these types of roles, I'm more than willing to help someone develop their messaging if they can at least go out there and like get deep with a customer on the technology side, understand use cases and challenges, because that background takes a long time to build up. So I'll leave you with sort of like a one final tip, right? So, you also want to be accepting and do something about your blind spots. Doing new things is hard and it's uncomfortable at first because it's something you've never done before. But you have to keep at it, and you have to sort of, be willing to learn and to be taught to get good at something new, right? Most of your areas for growth, if you're sort of making that change from the from the SE side to PM, are going to be on the business side. Odds are you've never developed pricing before as an SA or as an SE. That's hard. It's not trivial. It takes skill. It takes practice. You have to understand what are the decision points that come into that. How should you frame, like a value and COGS and the market segments, all this other stuff, how the things fit together. It takes practice and a lot of time to learn to do that stuff, right? Being able to do things like size and opportunity. The worst feeling you have is when an executive asks you, like, well, how big is that market segment, or how big is the opportunity there? You have to be able to have a number. And that's your job as the PM, right? You have to understand, because he's that executive, or he or she's making the trade-off. You're like, do we fund this project or that project? Is which has the biggest opportunity for us? Which can we service more? Things like addressable markets, serviceable markets, all these sort of, the businessy school stuff. You just want to have a basic understanding of what they mean and how to use them, how to quantify them and explain them, especially as you're talking to your leadership. And also being able to do things like opportunity segmentation, right? I had an old boss used to always beat it up. Well, is that really MISI, mutually exclusive? And I forgot the rest of the acronym, but it's not a wrong question. Like, when you sort of are thinking about the opportunity, if you can break it down into pieces, it lets you then sort of decide, well, should we focus on this piece first or that piece first? And we know about the whole pie, but which piece should we bite off first, right? And again, these are new skills, something you really have as an SA or SE. You may have seen it. You may be the consumer of the information during enablement sessions, stuff like that, but developing it, doing the math, understanding what resources to use, how to do estimation, what's credible, all top-down analysis, bottoms-up analysis. All these things are new. And that's okay. That's the hard part. We grow, we learn, but you have to keep an open mind. You can't go in there and say, hey, I know how this thing works, and this stuff doesn't matter. You have to really be willing to be taught. And to do that, find a mentor. There are lots of folks out there in tech and working in companies that, again, have that SASE background or an engineering background, or just a technical background, or didn't go to business school, or maybe, whatever. Those folks make great mentors. They understand sort of the practical challenges you're going through. They're sympathetic, and they, everyone likes to see people like them succeed, right? I mean, like, anytime I find another SDRC that wants to make their own, heck yeah, I will spend an hour with you, riffing, why you like it, what do you want to do, do you really want to be a product manager? Do you really want to be a product marketing manager? Do you want to be a tech marketing manager? Like, do you want to do something? You want to be in marketing? Helping you sort of work through all that stuff, right? Finding a mentor, someone you can sort of, tap whenever you have a question, and also give you honest feedback, right? If you're working on messaging for a new product, hey, like, can you kind of give me your thoughts on this? How did this look for the stuff I was working a year ago? Am I learning the stuff? All those things, just help, right? Getting that sort of feedback. You also want to take advantage of educational resources, like watching these types of sessions at product school. There's also tons of books on business strategy and product management and case studies from this and that. Read as much as you can, right? You want to make sure that you're not stuck in a position where you only learn a lesson when you go through it. That is a very expensive way to learn stuff. If you can stand on the shoulders of giants, learn, what others have done, learn techniques for messaging and how that works, learning different pricing scenarios and all that stuff. Like, all that stuff's been written in books ad nauseum. So read the books. I'm sure there's a book list out there. Read all the VC books, right? Like, all those do a pretty good job of talking about product management challenges, growing a company, growing a business, growing an opportunity. Because again, reading is a really fast way to learn, because you're able to sort of digest a lot of other really good experience very quickly and apply it, right? So in summary, again, SEs and SAs make great PMs because they have that technical background, the deep customer empathy. It's a great transition for anyone that wants to sort of be more strategic in their career, have more ownership, have more sort of insight, or have more influence on the product direction and strategy, that sort of nature. It's a lot of fun. There is a learning curve, but it's manageable. Like I said, you just have to be willing to learn and willing to go do the work to sort of ramp up on the skill that you're going to fill in the gap for. But there's lots of opportunities to do that, right? Again, you can start off by just overdoing some more strategic stuff in your current role, see if there's, again, resources online and in books, but, there's lots of ways to sort of learn that stuff. So that's pretty much it for my presentation today. It would be remiss on me not to mention that I am hiring for product managers to work on Amazon Key Spaces, which is one of our non-relational database services. It's a really cool role. You can, again, define the business strategy for your areas of ownership, drive roadmap for new features, help grow the business. Key Spaces is a really cool product and service. It helps some of the customers run some of their biggest and most mission critical workloads. If you want to learn more about sort of NoSQL and the opening, please check out the job posting I've got here on the link. You also can reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. We're always looking for product managers at AWS, not just on my team, but across all of our database and services team. So, thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.